It happened on a sunny Thursday afternoon, the kind of day when everything feels deceptively normal, until it isn't. The neighborhood park echoed with distant laughter, kids running across the grass, sprinklers hissing lazily in nearby lawns. But on the far end, near the bench shaded by the old oak tree, a young girl, thin, fragile, barely 10, suddenly stumbled. Her fingers twitched in the air like she was reaching for something no one else could see. Then, without warning, her knees buckled and she collapsed hard onto the gravel path, her face smacking the ground with a sickening thud. A moment of stunned silence followed, broken by the shrill scream of her mother. "No! Oh God, no! Baby, breathe! Breathe!" The mother dropped to her knees, arms trembling as she turned her daughter over, brushing dust and blood from her cheek. The girl's lips had already started to turn pale blue. Her limbs were twitching, jerking uncontrollably, her eyes rolled back into her skull. People nearby rushed over. One man called 911 with shaking hands, another pulled out a towel, someone else just froze, whispering, "Oh my God, is she okay?" The sound of sirens pierced the peaceful air within minutes, cutting through the tension like a knife. Neighbors stood in stunned circles, whispering theories. Was it a seizure? Did she fall? Does she have a condition? But the mother wasn't listening. Her whole focus was on her child, sobbing, whispering the little girl's name again and again as paramedics pushed her back to insert oxygen tubes and forelines. The scene was pure chaos, yet just a few feet away, someone stood with perfect calm, arms folded, a subtle smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. It was Karen. She didn't kneel, didn't flinch, didn't look surprised. She just stood there, watching. One paramedic asked the mother, "What condition does she have? What medication is she on?" The mother answered through panicked gasps, listing names, long, complex prescriptions she'd recited to countless doctors. But the paramedic's brow furrowed. "This doesn't add up," he muttered. "Her vitals are crashing like she's been sedated." Sedated? The mother blinked in confusion, terror blooming across her face. "No, no, that's not possible. She just took her morning dose, like always. I prepped it myself last night." Except she hadn't. Not this morning. She'd been running late. And now that she thought about it, something had looked different about the bottle. She dismissed it in the rush. But what if, as the ambulance doors slammed shut and the sirens roared to life again, the crowd slowly began to disperse, except for Karen, still unmoved. The mother, covered in dust, tears streaming, locked eyes with her. "What did you do?" she whispered. Karen didn't respond. She just tilted her head slightly, like she was admiring a painting. No remorse, no shock, just cold indifference. That night, as the machines beeped beside her daughter's ICU bed and the toxicology results began to come back, a truth started to unravel, one so horrifying it knocked the breath from her lungs. The medicine wasn't the same. It had been switched, and the only person who had both access and motive was the woman who watched her child collapse like it was entertainment. And Karen, she just stood there, smiling. Her name was Danielle Harper, a single mother in her mid-30s who had mastered the art of balancing heartbreak with strength, exhaustion with devotion. Life hadn't been gentle to her, but her love for her daughter, Ava, had become the force that pushed her through the darkest days. Ava was born with a rare neurological condition that affected her motor functions, immune system, and sometimes even her memory. Doctors never gave her more than a few years to live. Yet here she was, nearly 10, still fighting, still breathing, still smiling at the world with that toothy, crooked grin that made Danielle believe in miracles. Every morning was a battle. Waking up early to administer Ava's delicate cocktail of medications, preparing her food to strict dietary specifications, helping her with stretching exercises prescribed by the physical therapist, checking her vitals, logging every symptom. Danielle didn't sleep much, didn't socialize, didn't date. Her world revolved around Ava's health, her comfort, her life. And she didn't resent a second of it. Love had turned Danielle into a warrior, a quiet one, with messy hair, dark circles, and arms strong enough to carry both a child and a collapsing world. They used to live in a noisy city apartment, 4th floor, no elevator. Danielle would carry Ava on her hip, plus a bag full of medical supplies every single time they left for the hospital. But then, after a terrifying night, when Ava had a seizure during a power outage and it took the ambulance 27 minutes to find them, Danielle knew something had to change. She needed a home that was safer, quieter, closer to emergency services, and with a supportive community, at least on paper. That's how they found Willow Creek Estates, a gated suburban neighborhood just outside the city, managed by a homeowners association that prided itself on family values, peace, and order. The sales brochure boasted green lawns, safe parks, quiet streets, and smiling neighbors. Danielle toured the property twice before signing the lease. She saw kids biking together, flower beds blooming, families barbecuing. It felt like the perfect place for Ava to heal, calm, organized, and friendly. The school district had an inclusive program for kids with special needs. The local clinic was just 5 minutes away. Most importantly, there was a downstairs bedroom where Ava could sleep, so Danielle no longer had to carry her up flights of stairs every night. For the first few weeks, things were beautiful. Danielle decorated Ava's room with fairy lights and posters of space and dolphins, two things Ava was obsessed with. They planted strawberries in the tiny backyard together. Ava started smiling more, laughing even. She even made a friend, an 11-year-old boy from next door named Eli, who loved bringing over his dog to play. Danielle allowed herself to breathe for the first time in years. She began thinking they might finally be okay, but then came the notices. Small at first. Your trash can is visible from the curb. Please relocate behind your fence. Then, your grass exceeds the approved height by 1.25 inches. After that, a warning about Ava's medical ramp being an eyesore that didn't match the architectural harmony of the neighborhood. Danielle was stunned. She had built that ramp with her own hands after waiting 3 weeks for HOA approval and getting no response. When she pushed back, she was told her documentation must have gotten lost. But what truly caught her attention was the woman who delivered every one of those notices, Karen Whitmore, head of the HOA board. Karen was polite on the surface, but something about her smile always felt forced, like she was holding back something sharp. She'd wave, but never really look at Ava. Once, Ava tried to pet her dog during a community gathering, and Karen flinched like she was being approached by something diseased. Danielle brushed it off at first. Some people just weren't warm. But the pattern became clearer. Whenever Ava's equipment was visible, oxygen tanks, wheelchairs, or even the custom stroller, Karen would find something to complain about. "Can't you store that out of sight?" she asked one day, gesturing to the stroller as though it were a broken trash bin. Danielle gritted her teeth and smiled politely. She knew how these neighborhoods worked, rock the boat, and you're a troublemaker. But she also couldn't shrink her daughter's needs just to make others more comfortable. Over time, the HOA's rules began to feel less like community maintenance and more like a quiet campaign to make them feel unwelcome. The parking spot closest to their house was suddenly reassigned. Danielle received noise complaints for Ava's vocal outbursts during physical therapy, even though no one else nearby was ever cited for their children's late-night parties or barking dogs. Then came the so-called safety audit, during which Karen personally inspected the perimeter of their home and suggested that Danielle move the medicine storage cabinet from its visible place by the kitchen window. "We don't want children thinking this is a pharmacy," Karen said, smirking as she turned on her heels. That comment lingered in Danielle's mind for weeks. Why was Karen so interested in the medicine? Still, Danielle tried to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Karen was just uptight. Maybe she didn't understand disability. Maybe she thought she was helping. But one day, while retrieving her mail, Danielle noticed that Ava's prescription delivery, which usually came tightly sealed, was tampered with. She dismissed it at the time. Maybe the seal just tore in transit. It wasn't uncommon. But now, looking back, she realized that was the first sign, the first crack in the illusion, the first moment where safety began to unravel in the one place she had finally started calling home. Danielle didn't want to fight. She just wanted her daughter to live a life with dignity, laughter, and a little sunlight on her skin. That's all she ever wanted. She worked extra hours as a freelance transcriptionist to cover medical expenses. She spent nights researching new therapies, attending online parent support groups, talking to other moms who cried in silence while pretending to be strong. She documented every dose, every side effect, every change in Ava's behavior like a scientist observing a fragile universe. Her entire life was a blueprint of love, and it was working. Ava was thriving. That is, until things in Willow Creek began to shift, slowly, invisibly, like poison in water. A forgotten HOA form here. A complaint about medical odors there. And somewhere in the shadows, a woman who watched everything and said nothing, until one day, she didn't just say something, she did something, and everything changed. Her name was Karen Whitmore, but everyone in Willow Creek knew her simply as Karen, and not in the ironic way the internet had popularized the name. No, this Karen wore the crown proudly. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a self-appointed gatekeeper of everything from lawn lengths to mailbox designs. No decision passed in the neighborhood without her approval, or at least her commentary. She wasn't elected so much as inherited the position from the last board president, who moved out 2 years ago. Since then, Karen had turned the HOA from a quiet committee into her personal kingdom. She didn't just enforce the rules, she embodied them. Every morning, she walked the streets with a clipboard in hand and sunglasses on her nose, nodding at some neighbors, scowling at others, her sharp eyes scanning for even the faintest hint of disorder. An out-of-place trash bin, a car tire touching the grass, a wind chime that dared to tinkle after 9 p.m. To some, she was the upholder of order. To most, she was a menace with a badge. Karen was the kind of woman who always smiled with her lips, but never with her eyes. She had perfectly styled blonde hair that never seemed to move, a rotation of pastel-colored sweaters draped neatly over her shoulders, and a permanent expression of polite disdain. Her house sat at the center of the cul-de-sac like a throne room, immaculate lawn, trimmed hedges, and surveillance cameras visible from every corner. She waved to delivery drivers only to report them for idling too long. She greeted children on Halloween with full-size candy bars and notes reminding their parents to supervise them more closely next year. But it wasn't until Danielle and Ava moved in that Karen's carefully constructed performance of suburban benevolence began to twist into something far more intrusive. At first, Karen welcomed them, barely. She dropped off a laminated HOA handbook within 24 hours of their move-in and pointed out the top 10 rules for neighborhood harmony. Danielle remembered her exact words. "We're a peaceful, proud community here. No drama, no chaos. Everyone knows their place and does their part." There was something unsettling in the way she said it, like a warning dressed as hospitality. Danielle smiled, thanked her, and didn't think much of it until the notices started coming. It began innocently enough. A reminder that Danielle's wheelchair ramp needed to be approved and painted in neutral tones. A suggestion that her garbage bin be placed out of sight. Then came the citations, written warnings for things as absurd as Ava's oxygen tank being visible through the window, or a scent complaint regarding her medical creams. Danielle was baffled. No one else seemed to get these warnings. Neighbors with dogs barking late into the night? No problem. A family 3 doors down that hosted weekend parties? Perfectly fine. But Ava's medical equipment or Danielle parking too close to her own driveway. Suddenly, that was a problem. And Karen was always behind it, signing every notice with her perfect cursive and a closing line that read, "Let's maintain the harmony of our beautiful community." Karen's presence became a fixture in their lives. She was always there, walking past their house a little too slowly, staring at Ava's window a little too long. Once, Danielle caught her peering through the slats of the backyard fence. When asked if she needed something, Karen merely replied, "Just checking to see if your strawberries are in the approved plot size." Another time, Ava came inside, visibly upset. She said Karen had told her not to leave her medical stroller on the sidewalk because people might trip. Danielle was livid. That stroller was the only thing that gave Ava independence. But when she confronted Karen, she was met with an icy smile and a condescending tone. "We're all trying to keep the neighborhood safe, Danielle. Surely you understand that." What made Karen so dangerous wasn't just her position, it was her perception. She believed she was always right, always justified, that her obsession with order made her virtuous. But beneath that self-righteous surface was something uglier: resentment toward anything or anyone that disrupted the pristine image she had of Willow Creek. Danielle suspected it wasn't Ava's medical needs that bothered Karen. It was the inconvenience of having to see them. The visible reminders that not everyone in their cookie-cutter world fit perfectly into the mold. Karen wanted perfectly trimmed not just in the lawns, but in the lives that lived behind them. Soon, Karen wasn't just critiquing the ramp or the trash bins. She started inserting herself in more personal ways. She once left a note suggesting Danielle hire in-home help if managing everything on her own is becoming too much. Another time, Danielle found Karen on her porch, uninvited, asking if she could recommend a cleaner vitamin regimen for Ava because some neighbors were concerned about the strong smells. That was the moment Danielle realized this wasn't just about rules. It was about control. Karen didn't see Danielle and Ava as neighbors. She saw them as a problem she needed to manage. Despite everything, Danielle tried to remain civil. She knew that confronting Karen publicly could escalate things, and she couldn't afford to be labeled a troublemaker in a neighborhood like this. But privately, she started documenting everything: notes, citations, photos, even times Karen loitered outside their property. Her gut told her something wasn't right, and then the medicine started going missing. It was subtle at first: bottles slightly out of place, a label peeling, a strange odor. Danielle chalked it up to stress, to distraction, but deep down, she started suspecting the unthinkable. And the only person with access, opportunity, and enough passive-aggressive intent to make a mother's life unbearable was Karen. Karen Whitmore wasn't just the HOA president. She was the queen of an empire built on intimidation, dressed up in pink sweaters and HOA newsletters. And Danielle was about to discover just how far Karen would go to protect her perfect little kingdom, even if it meant putting a child's life at risk. At first, it was just small things. Things you wouldn't even notice if you weren't already walking through life with the burden of vigilance that comes from caring for a medically fragile child. A package arriving late. A grocery bag that was clearly sliced open and retaped, sitting awkwardly on the doorstep like someone had tried to snoop. Danielle didn't think much of it. Maybe the delivery guy was clumsy. Maybe the wind blew it oddly. Then came the complaints, and signed at first, later printed on official HOA letterhead. "Please refrain from placing soiled medical supplies in the exterior trash." One read, though Danielle had always double-bagged everything and followed protocol. Another warned her about excessive odors from medicinal creams, which struck her as absurd. Ava's lotions were scent-free and medically approved. The most unsettling notice came a week later. HOA advises all residents to store prescription items securely. Willow Creek does not take responsibility for missing items. There had been no missing prescriptions at that point. At least, not that Danielle was aware of, but reading that line made her stomach twist. Then came the changes in Ava. It was gradual, almost too gradual to catch. But when you're a mother to a child like Ava, you track everything: sleep patterns, energy levels, even the light in her eyes. And something shifted. Ava, who usually greeted mornings with a sleepy smile and a demand for pancakes, started waking up groggy, disoriented. Her speech slowed. Her balance worsened. She stopped asking to play in the garden, preferring to lie curled on the couch, staring blankly at cartoons she used to laugh at. Danielle noted it all in her medical journal. Day 3, unusual drowsiness. Day 5, skip lunch, no appetite. Day 6, slept through PT session. The therapist noticed too. "She's not herself today," she said softly during their Friday session. "Have you changed anything? Meds, food, sleep routine?" Danielle shook her head, heart pounding. No, nothing had changed. At least not on purpose. That night, Danielle stood in front of the medicine cabinet, the overhead light buzzing softly above her. She pulled out each bottle, examining the labels. Everything looked fine. Same brands, same dosages, same pharmacy stickers. But still, something didn't feel right. The bottle of levetiracetam felt lighter than it should have. The liquid inside sloshed differently, and the tamper-proof seal. Was that a hairline crack? She wasn't sure. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe she was just exhausted and scared and seeing ghosts in shadows. But the feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. 2 days later, it happened again. Ava had a near collapse in the living room. No seizures, no choking, just a sudden drop, like her body had turned off temporarily. Danielle caught her before she hit the floor. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. She called the pediatrician immediately. They ran tests, blood work, urine. Everything came back inconclusive. She may be reacting to something environmental, the doctor offered. New detergent? Different water source? Maybe even a food intolerance? But Danielle knew better. This wasn't allergies. This was chemical. Controlled. Intentional. Still, without evidence, she had nothing but a mother's instinct, and in places like Willow Creek, instincts were dismissed as overreactions. The final straw came on a Wednesday afternoon when Danielle returned from a 5-minute trip to the mailbox and noticed something off. The medicine tray, which she always left sealed on the counter before lunch, had been moved. Not far, just slightly. But the edge wasn't flush with the backsplash like she always left it. And one of the syringes pre-filled for Ava's noon dosage looked off. The plunger was lower than she remembered, and the liquid inside was slightly discolored. She froze. The door had been locked. The alarm hadn't gone off. Nothing was broken, but someone had been in her house, and someone had tampered with Ava's medicine. A sense of horror swept over her like ice water. She grabbed the tray and threw it into the sink, heart racing, hands shaking. Ava was in her room, napping safe for now. Danielle double-checked. Every lock, every window, even the back patio door. All secure. But that didn't matter. Whoever it was had a key, or access, or both. There were only a handful of people who knew their daily routine. The therapist, the pharmacist, 2 neighbors, and Karen, the woman who knew everything that happened on this street, who had once commented unprompted on Ava's dosage schedule, who always seemed to be around at the most inconvenient times, who had delivered a laminated HOA regulation booklet within hours of their move-in and took copious notes during her daily patrols like she was preparing for a courtroom deposition. That night, Danielle didn't sleep. She sat at her laptop, researching medication tampering cases, reviewing home surveillance systems, cross-checking Ava's symptoms with potential sedatives. Then, just before dawn, she did something she had never done before. She opened the hidden storage box in her bedroom closet where she kept Ava's backup meds. The emergency batch, the ones untouched for months. She gave Ava a full set from that sealed supply, careful to record every milligram. And like clockwork, within 24 hours, Ava began to bounce back. Her speech returned. Her appetite surged. She even asked to go outside and water the strawberries. Danielle was relieved, but also terrified. This was no longer suspicion. It was confirmation. Someone had been drugging her child. The next step was proof. She couldn't go to the HOA. Karen was the HOA. She couldn't go to the police without evidence. So she installed a hidden camera, small, discreet, tucked into the corner above the medicine shelf. And she waited, pretended to leave for errands, pretended to forget to lock up, pretended everything was normal. 3 days later, it happened. On a sunny afternoon, Danielle stepped outside with a basket of folded laundry, left the door ajar, and watched from across the street through a neighbor's front window. At exactly 1:17 p.m., Karen walked by, clipboard in hand, phone at her ear. She paused in front of the Harper home, glanced over her shoulder, then slipped onto the porch. The door creaked open just a crack. A full minute passed. 2. Then she walked out, calmly, confidently, like nothing had happened. Danielle's breath caught in her throat. She ran home, grabbed the camera footage, and pressed play. There she was, Karen, inside her kitchen. opening the medicine cabinet, swapping bottles, wiping her fingerprints, then leaving like a ghost. And just like that, the mystery wasn't a mystery anymore. It was war. Danielle sat on the edge of the kitchen chair, her hands trembling as she stared at the 3 amber-colored medicine bottles lined up before her. Her fingers hovered above them like they were live grenades, dangerous, ticking, laced with something vile. For 10 days, she had been noticing subtle shifts, the way Ava's body seemed to slow down, the unusual paleness of her lips, the unpredictable drowsiness. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe she'd made a mistake, maybe the dosage was wrong, maybe she was sleep-deprived and missing the obvious. But when Ava started slurring her words and barely responding to cartoons she normally adored, Danielle couldn't shake the sinking feeling that something far more sinister was happening. Still, she fought the urge to jump to conclusions. She'd always prided herself on being rational, even under pressure. But this was a mother's nightmare creeping closer in disguise. With a deep breath, she unscrewed the cap of the anti-seizure medication and brought it up to the light. The liquid inside had a slightly different hue, less clear, more cloudy. The smell was faintly off too, not enough to alarm a casual observer. But Danielle wasn't casual. This was her daughter's lifeline. She opened the second bottle, then the third. Same oddities, same gut-churning realization. Something wasn't right. Someone had tampered with Ava's medicine. Her brain reeled, thoughts crashing over each other in a torrent of fear and disbelief. Am I losing my mind? Am I seeing ghosts because I'm scared? Her heart thudded against her ribs. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm right? Who would do this? Who would be sick enough to hurt a child, my child? Asterisk her mind raced through every possibility, grasping at logic, gasping for reason. And no matter how hard she tried to dismiss it, every path led back to one person, Karen, the clipboard queen, the self-appointed warden of Willow Creek, the woman who watched everything like a hawk, yet pretended to see nothing. Danielle recalled all the strange encounters, Karen's subtle comments about Ava's medication, her offhand remarks about excessive care, and most recently her bold intrusion about unsealed packaging being a risk to neighborhood children. Karen had always mastered disdain under smiles, but those smiles had teeth. And suddenly Danielle knew. This wasn't in her head. This was happening. And Karen was behind it. Determined to get proof, Danielle sprinted to her laptop and opened the newly installed security camera feed. She skipped through hours of footage, watching birds flutter on the porch, wind rustling the curtains, Ava asleep on the couch. Then, on Tuesday at exactly 1:17 p.m., she saw it. Karen, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched like a visor of control, standing at the edge of their front yard. Danielle's pulse quickened as Karen casually stepped up to the porch, paused like she was looking at a weed on the step, then glanced around and opened the storm door. Her fingers were quick, confident, precise. She leaned inside, just far enough to be unseen from the road, then reached toward the small shelf by the kitchen window where Danielle always prepped Ava's meds. It was just 5 seconds, in and out, but it was enough. Danielle's hands covered her mouth. She rewound the footage, watched again, then again. There was no mistaking it. Karen had entered her home, uninvited, and tampered with the very thing that kept her daughter alive. She felt the blood drain from her face. A mother's terror washed over her, heavy and suffocating. She could have killed her. The realization slammed into her chest like a freight train. Karen hadn't just broken boundaries, she had crossed a sacred line, invaded the safety of their home, and put a vulnerable child in harm's way for what? To prove a point? To punish Danielle for not conforming? To reclaim control over a neighborhood she ruled like a queen? As the video looped again in the background, Danielle's breath came in short, panicked gasps. She couldn't sit still. She paced the room, gripping her phone, debating what to do. Do I call the police? The HOA board? A lawyer? She wanted justice, but more than that, she wanted protection. Ava was upstairs, safe for now, but what if Karen had done this before? What if this wasn't the first time? What if next time? Danielle couldn't finish that thought. She couldn't go there. Then her phone buzzed. It was her next-door neighbor, Allison. A quiet woman, kept to herself mostly, but kind. Her message was short. Hey, just checking. Was someone supposed to be at your house yesterday? I saw Karen go in for a sec while you were gone. Thought maybe she was dropping something off. Seemed odd. Danielle's knees nearly buckled. That was it. That was the final thread tying it all together. Independent confirmation. Outside eyes. She wasn't alone. Someone else had seen the intrusion, and now she had both visual and eyewitness proof. This wasn't paranoia. It was reality, and it was far worse than she'd ever imagined. The emotional weight of it all crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She sank to the floor, sobbing, tears of fear, of rage, of guilt. Guilt that she hadn't noticed sooner. Guilt that she hadn't trusted her instincts. Guilt that her sweet, defenseless little girl had been suffering under the hands of a neighbor hiding in plain sight. I'm so sorry, she whispered through clenched teeth, staring at the medicine bottles. I'm so sorry, baby. I didn't see it. I should have seen it. But she saw now. Every false smile. Every passive-aggressive note. Every intrusion disguised as concern. Karen hadn't just crossed a line, she declared war. And Danielle? She was no longer afraid. She was furious, because now she had proof. Now she had fire in her bones. Now she was going to burn Karen's empire to the ground. The day began with sunlight pouring gently through Ava's bedroom window, casting soft beams across her polka-dotted bedsheets and the stuffed dolphin she always hugged while sleeping. Danielle stood by the door with a tray in her hands, warm oatmeal, a sliced banana, and the newly opened bottle of backup medication. After what she'd discovered, there was no way she'd risk using anything from the regular shelf again. Not after catching Karen on camera. Not after realizing that someone, that woman, had violated the sanctity of her home and endangered her daughter. Ava had seemed better these past 2 days. Her cheeks had regained a hint of pink, her voice had a little strength, and she'd even laughed, an exhausted but genuine giggle at a cartoon on the couch. Danielle had started to believe the nightmare was ending, that she had caught the monster just in time, that with her backup meds, caution, and vigilance, they could return to normal. But the nightmare wasn't over. It was waiting, and it would strike with more cruelty than before. Ava barely touched her breakfast that morning. She looked pale again, even weaker. "Mommy, I feel heavy," she whispered, her eyelids fluttering like they were too much to hold open. Danielle's heart skipped. She checked her daughter's forehead. No fever. Her hands were cold. "Did you take anything, baby? Did you find any other medicine?" Ava just blinked slowly and shook her head. Danielle rushed to the bathroom, rummaged through drawers, checked every locked cabinet, every shelf, the kitchen counter, even the trash. Everything was exactly where she had left it. Or so it seemed. She returned to Ava's room and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, swaying slightly. "Ava?" Danielle's voice cracked. "Ava, talk to me." Ava's lips moved, but no sound came out. Then her eyes rolled back, and her small frame collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. Panic surged through Danielle's chest as she caught her mid-fall, cradling her daughter's limp body in her arms. "Ava! No, 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 no. Please, baby, look at me. Stay with me," she screamed, tears blurring her vision. Ava wasn't breathing, right? Her chest rose shallowly, erratically. Her fingers twitched like she was trying to hold onto something that wasn't there. Danielle grabbed her phone and called 911, her voice trembling with desperation. "My daughter, she's unresponsive again. She's not breathing properly. Please, send someone now. Hurry." The operator's voice was calm, practiced, but Danielle's mind was already spinning into chaos. She laid Ava down on the rug, elevating her feet, performing the exact emergency steps her pediatrician had trained her on. But her hands were shaking too hard. She was trying to stay calm, but every second that ticked by felt like a lifetime. "Hold on, baby," she sobbed. "Hold on. I've got you. I'm not letting go." The ambulance's siren cut through the suburban stillness minutes later, its flashing lights bouncing off the neat driveways and polished cars of Willow Creek like a mocking spotlight. Neighbors peeked through blinds, stepped onto porches. Some looked worried, others just curious. And Karen? She stood 3 houses down, arms folded, eyes locked on the scene with a look so neutral it felt hostile. Danielle didn't care. She screamed at the paramedics as they ran inside. Something is wrong. Someone's done something to her. I know it. You have to check everything. Don't assume it's a seizure, please. She was fine yesterday. Please just listen to me. The lead EMT tried to calm her while assessing Ava. Pulse is shallow. She's been sedated with something. This isn't just her condition, he murmured to the team as they lifted Ava onto the stretcher. Danielle rode in the ambulance, gripping her daughter's hand and praying like she never had before. Not even during the early diagnosis, not even during Ava's first seizure. This was different. This was evil. And it wasn't natural, it was deliberate. At the ER, nurses swarmed like bees. For lines, oxygen tubes, monitors beeping frantically. A doctor asked about medications. Danielle recounted everything: what Ava was prescribed, what she should have taken, what had been replaced. The moment the words possible poisoning left Danielle's mouth, everything shifted. Toxicology was ordered, blood samples drawn, urine collected. Her child lay unconscious under a web of wires and sterile lights, and Danielle felt like her soul was being pulled out, piece by piece. The waiting was agony. Time moved like molasses. At some point, a social worker came by, offering tissues and a clipboard. Danielle refused to sit, refused to leave Ava's side. Every breath from her daughter was a thread tethering her sanity. Hours later, the toxicology report returned, and when the doctor walked into the room, he didn't hide his alarm. We found significant traces of zolpidem in her system, he said. Danielle blinked. Zolpidem? That's Ambien. The doctor nodded. A powerful sedative, not meant for children, certainly not in these amounts. It was masked in the solution of her medication. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Danielle's entire body went cold. Her mouth went dry. Sleeping pills. Someone had switched her daughter's medicine with sleeping pills. A dose that could have killed her. A dose designed not just to harm, but to disable. It wasn't just tampered with, Danielle whispered, staring blankly at the floor. It was replaced completely. Her mind reeled. How many doses had Ava taken? How long had Karen been doing this? Had she been testing, escalating? Would Ava have died if Danielle hadn't noticed? Danielle stood up, abruptly, her heart burning with fury. I want the police, she told the nurse. Now, I have video evidence. I have a witness. I know who did this. The nurse nodded and disappeared. Danielle looked at her daughter, fragile, hooked to machines, chest rising and falling like a whisper, and something inside her broke. Not into weakness, but into armor. The mother she had always been was now a soldier. Later that night, as detectives arrived and copies of the footage were handed over, Danielle told them everything. Every complaint, every intrusion, every moment she doubted herself, second-guessed her instincts. She didn't sugarcoat anything. Not this time. When the officer asked, "Do you know the suspect's full name?" she replied without hesitation, "Karen Whitmore. She's the HOA president." The officer raised his brow. "We'll take it from here, ma'am." But Danielle wasn't done. "No," she said, her voice steady. "You start here. You finish when she's behind bars." As she watched the officers drive away, Danielle returned to the hospital room and sat beside Ava, brushing back her hair gently. Her baby. Her world. She leaned down and kissed her forehead, whispering through clenched teeth, "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. And Mommy's going to make sure she never touches you or anyone ever again." Because this wasn't just a second collapse. It was the moment everything would finally fall for Karen. Danielle didn't sleep for 2 days, not because she couldn't, but because she wouldn't. While Ava remained in the hospital, sedated under close observation, Danielle became a mother possessed by purpose. Her heartbreak had hardened into rage, and that rage now fueled her like fire. She spent every minute organizing files, video footage, medical records, pharmacy receipts, Ava's treatment logs, HOA notices, and most importantly, the footage of Karen slipping into her home and tampering with the medication shelf. She printed photos, made duplicates, labeled USB drives. Every moment of suspicion that once made her doubt herself now became a puzzle piece she connected with painful clarity. Karen's face, calm and cruel, hovered in her mind like a mask of mockery. But Danielle was done being polite. This time, she wasn't asking for permission. She was demanding justice. Her first stop was the HOA office, a small building near the community clubhouse where smiling pictures of board members, including Karen, hung on the wall like proud school portraits. Danielle walked in with a binder clutched to her chest. The receptionist barely had time to greet her before Danielle asked, "Where's the board president?" The receptionist stammered, Ms. Whitmore isn't in right now, but I can take a message." Danielle cut her off. "No message. I'm reporting a crime. One of your board members committed an act of poisoning against my daughter. I have evidence, and if the HOA chooses to protect her, you'll all be complicit." The woman paled, her fingers hovering midair over the keyboard. Danielle slapped a flash drive onto the counter. "Watch it, then do the right thing." But the HOA did not do the right thing. The next day, Danielle received a letter, hand-delivered, of course, on official Willow Creek HOA stationery. It was polite, as always, and entirely dismissive. "Dear Ms. Harper, after reviewing your concerns, the HOA finds no basis for action against Mrs. Whitmore at this time. As a courtesy, we suggest resolving interpersonal disagreements through mediation or neighborly discussion. Thank you for your cooperation in maintaining harmony within our community." Danielle read it 3 times before tearing it in half. Harmony? Karen had drugged her child. There was no harmony. There was no disagreement. There was a crime. Danielle immediately turned to the police. This time, she had evidence, a timeline, even a neighbor's statement. Detective Rodriguez, a tall, tired-looking man with salt and pepper stubble, took the case seriously from the beginning. "You've done most of our job for us," he said, flipping through her organized binder. "This is one of the most detailed, personal investigations I've seen in a while." When Danielle asked if Karen could be arrested, immediately he shook his head. "We need the lab results to confirm what was in the medicine bottles. Once we have that, combined with your footage and the witness, she'll have nowhere to hide." Meanwhile, Karen started to panic, but not openly. Her mask cracked subtly. She stopped patrolling the neighborhood. Her clipboard disappeared. The newsletter she wrote each week suddenly skipped an edition. Danielle watched her from her porch as Karen avoided eye contact and hurried into her house whenever she saw police near the Harper home. Then, during a community board meeting where Danielle showed up, uninvited but unafraid, Karen attempted her most despicable move yet. She played the victim. Dressed in muted colors with fake tears glistening at the corners of her carefully made-up eyes, Karen addressed the room like a wronged martyr. "I've been unfairly accused," she said, voice trembling. "These are wild claims, designed to tarnish my name, my reputation. I've dedicated years to this community. I love all our residents, even those who don't appreciate structure. I would never harm a child. Never." She even had the audacity to clutch her pearls and sob, "I'm the real victim here." Danielle stood slowly, the silence around her heavy. Then she walked to the front of the room, inserted her USB into the projector, and hit play. There was no shouting, no dramatics, just footage. Karen entering her porch, Karen reaching into her home, Karen handling Ava's medicine shelf, Karen exiting like nothing happened. A neighbor in the back gasped. Someone else murmured, "That's her. That's Karen." Danielle let the footage loop once, then calmly turned off the projector. "Your victim," she said, her voice steady, "is in a hospital bed because of that woman." She didn't wait for a response. She walked out. 2 days later, the police called. The toxicology results were back. Sedatives consistent with salpeter had been detected in Ava's bloodstream, and chemical residue matched trace samples found on one of the replaced medication bottles. Rodriguez was direct. We're issuing a warrant for Karen Whitmore's arrest. News spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. Karen was taken into custody that afternoon, escorted from her pristine home in handcuffs, her sunglasses failing to hide the panic on her face. The same neighbors who once waved at her in admiration now watched from behind curtains, whispering in shock. The queen of the HOA had fallen. And Danielle? She stood on her front lawn, holding Ava, now recovering and giggling softly in her arms, and watched it all with quiet satisfaction. Justice wasn't just a dream. It had begun, and she'd fought for it, not with anger, but with evidence, not with chaos, but with truth. Because when it came to protecting her child, Danielle didn't care how powerful the enemy was. She would bring them down, even if they wore a crown made of rules. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, cold air conditioning, and nerves. Danielle sat stiffly in her blazer, hands clasped in her lap, knuckles white. Just a few feet away sat Karen Whitmore, her face paler than usual, eyes devoid of the smug confidence she once wore like armor. She was no longer the queen of Willow Creek, but a defendant in a county courtroom, flanked by her sharp-suited attorney and hiding behind oversized glasses like they could shield her from the weight of her crimes. Danielle's heart thudded as the judge entered, gavel striking would like thunder. This was it, the place where everything would be laid bare. The lies, the cruelty, the unbearable danger her daughter had faced. Danielle wasn't just here as a witness. She was here as a mother seeking justice for the crime that nearly killed her child. The prosecution began with methodical precision. Surveillance footage was submitted and played again, each time making the courtroom colder. Karen's attorney tried to object, tried to stall, but the video was undeniable. Karen entering the property uninvited, reaching toward the shelf, touching the medicine tray, and leaving. Danielle's stomach twisted each time the footage looped, but she held her composure. When the prosecutor laid out the toxicology report, traces of zolpidem in Ava's blood, matching samples on the tampered bottles, a hush fell over the courtroom. The facts were brutal. Karen had entered Danielle's home multiple times and replaced Ava's prescribed medication with a powerful sedative. The intent was clear. The harm was evident. Then it was Danielle's turn. She stood and walked slowly to the witness box, a folder of Ava's photos in her hand. The prosecutor gave her a gentle nod. Please state your name. Danielle Harper. And your relation to the victim? She's my daughter, Ava Harper, 10 years old, disabled, innocent. Danielle's voice cracked, just once, before she swallowed hard and continued. She almost died because someone decided to play God with her medicine. As she testified, the room became heavy with emotion. She recounted Ava's deterioration, how she'd changed gradually, how she'd grown sleepy, weaker, unresponsive. She described the horror of holding her limp body, not once but twice, while waiting for an ambulance. She spoke about the paranoia, the fear, the guilt she felt for not catching it sooner. I trusted my neighbors, she said, staring directly at Karen. I believed I had moved to a place where my daughter could be safe. Instead, I was watched, monitored, targeted, and my child was nearly killed by someone who thought her comfort mattered more than my daughter's life. The courtroom was silent, save for a sniffle from a juror in the back row. Danielle continued, her voice firmer now. I'm not here to make anyone hate her, she said, nodding toward Karen. I'm here so no one ever does this again. So no parent ever has to hold their dying child and wonder what poison was slipped into their food, their drink, their veins. My daughter didn't just suffer, she was violated, and so was I. When Danielle stepped down from the stand, the room exhaled. Even the judge looked affected. Karen's attorney tried to shift the blame. He called her a pillar of the community, referenced her volunteer work, her time on the HOA board. He claimed she had never intended harm, that maybe she mistakenly handled the medication while checking in on a neighbor's safety. But the jury didn't buy it, and neither did the judge. The prosecution called one last witness, Allison, the quiet neighbor who had seen Karen enter Danielle's home. Calm and credible, she confirmed what the footage already showed. She wasn't checking on anyone, Allison said firmly. She was sneaking in. She waited until no one was looking. When asked why she hadn't spoken up sooner, she admitted she hadn't realized what was happening at first. But once Danielle showed me what she found, I knew I had to say something. Because silence is what people like Karen count on. Karen was then asked if she wished to testify. Her lawyer hesitated, but Karen stood, either out of arrogance or desperation. She tried to play her usual card, control cloaked in civility. I did not poison anyone, she began. I was simply concerned. The child was clearly unwell. I worried the mother wasn't managing things correctly. I may have tried to adjust the medicine out of care, out of concern for the child's quality of life. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Danielle's fists clenched in her lap. The prosecutor rose to cross-examine. So just to clarify, you, a woman with no medical license, no legal guardianship, and no consent, entered a private home and adjusted a disabled child's medication on your own judgment? Karen paused, sweat beating at her temple. Yes. The courtroom exploded in whispers. After final arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 hours. The verdict, guilty. Karen Whitmore was convicted on 3 felony counts: unlawful entry, child endangerment, and willful tampering with medication resulting in bodily harm. Her sentencing was swift. The judge, stern and unapologetic, looked directly at Karen as he read it aloud. Your position in the community gave you influence, not immunity. What you did was a calculated abuse of power and a direct attack on a vulnerable child's right to live. This court hereby sentences you to 6 years in state prison without parole and fines totaling $50,000 to be paid in restitution. Karen didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stood there, stunned and stripped of every ounce of control she once lorded over others. The gavel fell. Justice, in its purest form, had been served. Danielle left the courtroom that day holding Ava's hand, her daughter smiling softly and unaware of the courtroom battles fought in her name. But Danielle knew, and as she looked up at the sky outside the courthouse, sunlight warming her face, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: peace. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a mother's triumph. And Karen? She would never walk through their neighborhood again. The days after the trial felt like exhaling after holding your breath underwater for far too long. Danielle would still jolt awake at 3 a.m., instinctively rushing to check on Ava, half expecting to find her unconscious or cold. Trauma doesn't vanish just because justice is served. It lingers in shadows, in routines, in the soft moments that once turned into nightmares. But slowly, gently, life began to rebuild itself. Ava started laughing again, not the tired giggles she'd forced before, but real ones, loud, bright, contagious. She danced in the living room in her soft socks, spun in her wheelchair in the garden, and whispered, "Mommy, I feel safe now," like it was the most magical sentence in the world. And for Danielle, it was. She often sat by Ava's bedside after she fell asleep, her little chest rising and falling with the kind of peace that every mother fights endlessly to protect. And in those quiet hours, Danielle would think about all the mothers out there, single mothers, tired mothers, terrified mothers, who are constantly second-guessing themselves. The ones who are dismissed when they raise alarms, who are told they're being too emotional, too sensitive, or just stressed. She thought about the women who move into safe neighborhoods, hoping for clean streets and friendly smiles, only to find judgment, isolation, and sometimes even evil wearing the mask of order. She wanted them to know, you're not crazy, you're not weak, you're not overreacting. Danielle knew now more than ever that motherhood was more than love, it was war. A quiet war fought in doctors' offices, at kitchen tables, in front of school boards and HOA meetings. A war waged with instinct as your only armor and love as your only weapon. And yet, what a weapon it is, because it was love that made her notice the slight change in Ava's medicine. Love that made her question the fake smiles and subtle threats. Love that made her gather evidence, confront systems, face courts, and tear down the walls of silence. Love that turned a woman who once felt powerless into a warrior who protected her child against the unthinkable. To every community, Danielle had a message. Listen to the women who speak softly but carry truth in their eyes. Pay attention when a mother says something's wrong. Don't brush it off. Don't label it drama. Because behind every panicked voice is a child she's trying to save, and sometimes that child's only hope is the world listening just in time. HOA boards aren't courts of justice. Neighborhood rules don't outweigh a child's right to safety. And silence? Silence is what lets predators hide in plain sight. To every mother, Danielle wanted to say, you are enough. You are not invisible. Your fear is valid. Your love is power. Trust your instincts, even when the world calls you hysterical. Ask questions, even when others roll their eyes. Document everything. Speak up. Don't be afraid to be the mother who makes noise, because that noise might be the only thing that keeps your child breathing. Danielle would never forget what Ava endured, but neither would she forget the strength that rose from their pain. She didn't just survive this battle, she became the voice for those still fighting. And though the scars may remain, they now told a story of triumph, courage, and a mother's unwavering vow. You will never hurt my child again. Not on my watch. If this story moved you, if it stirred your heart, angered your spirit, or reminded you of how fragile safety can be, then don't let it end here. Share this video, not just to expose what happened in one quiet neighborhood, but to raise awareness about what's happening silently in so many others. Injustice doesn't always wear a mask of violence. Sometimes it hides behind clipped hedges and polished smiles. Sometimes it's buried in HOA bylaws and delivered in folded notices. And sometimes it takes a child nearly collapsing for the truth to finally come to light. This isn't just Danielle and Ava's story. It's a wake-up call for communities everywhere. It's a reminder to stand up, speak out, and never stay silent when something feels wrong. If you're a parent, a neighbor, or just someone who believes in doing what's right, be the person who notices, who checks in, who believes mothers when they say, something isn't right. Your voice could be the one that changes everything. And if you've ever faced something similar, if you've been silenced, dismissed, or forced to fight for what should have been protected, drop your story in the comments below. Let others know they're not alone. Let's build a community where victims are believed, where parents are supported, and where predators, no matter how well-dressed, are held accountable. This is HOA Karen Shorts, where real stories shine a light on silent injustice and fight for the families who refuse to back down. Like, share, subscribe, and always remember, truth doesn't stay buried forever. Your voice matters, your fight matters, and justice always finds its way.